Yeah, so what I want to start off with is the discussion about Cynthia, because I think it's really important that we bring out and make people aware of that research that we did all those years ago, because it's like, for me it's like reinventing the wheel, but so many people haven't seen it out there. So many people wonder what you're talking about when you say, oh, have you seen the video, the Cynthia story? But I think it's time it was sort of up there and out. Now, with the actual picture, the original film that we made, I don't have the copyright on that. I mean, I have a part interest in it, but I don't have the whole thing. There's about 10 people. So what I've decided to do is just talk about these things and stick them up on YouTube and on the RMI website for people to look at, so that anybody who's interested can sort of go there and find out. Because they were extraordinary stories. I mean, one of the things, when Cynthia began, Cynthia came to me, I don't remember the exact reason, but it wasn't from my memory. I don't think, it gets a bit vague after all these years, but I don't think it was to do with reincarnation. But she came, we did hypnosis, she was a good trance subject, and we did past life memory to see how she'd go. And she remembered a number of lives, and one of them, the most striking, was one where she was a black slave in America. And she described being whipped to death by some slave owner. But it was a very real experience, and she actually changed accent, her whole way of talking completely changed. So it wasn't like she was talking with the Cynthia's English accent, she has an English accent. She'd suddenly changed to this American drawl, Mr. Johnson, so that's the way she was talking. And so that was really interesting. So that made me then work further with her to try and see if we can get something a bit more meat out of with her memory. And so we ended up with the French life, where she remembered a life in France and where she got in the French Revolution. So we thought, okay, let's check this one out. Now, she remembered living in a country house. She remembered living as an older person, marrying and going to Paris and living in Paris. And she remembered the ways the coaches used to go. And she remembered a country house down by the water, down in Mont Saint-Michel. And so she gave me all this life. And then I tried to see, well, she was French. I mean, she's English now, speaks English. Could she speak French? So, I said to her, can you speak French? She said no. And then she said, well, I did learn about 2 months of it or something when I was about 11, but I can't remember it. So I said, okay. So under trance, she could actually speak French. And depending on the depth of trance, when she went really deep, it was really fluent French. When she came light, it wasn't so fluent. Because trance states, hypnosis is like that, you go up and down, a bit like a sine wave. And so anyway, I thought that was pretty good. So when we then decided we'd take her to France and see if we could really check out the life, she was able to remember the way the coaches used to go, and she took us across miles of France, quite backcountry, what are now backcountry roads and all sorts of things. And the first thing we did when we got to France is we found a guy, we sat her in front of this guy and filmed it, with her in deep trance, and the Frenchman spoke French to her, and she answered in French. And they had this conversation that lasted between them for about 45 minutes. And he said that the amazing thing to him was that the French she spoke was old French. It wasn't French as you speak it today. And he also, we moved it forward because with this problem of her going deeper and lighter, she started towards the end of it of actually speaking in English, but listening in French. So she was listening to him in French and answering him in English. But she obviously knew what he was saying in French. So it was a very, very interesting exercise because it was something you certainly couldn't do on, a couple of months French. I mean, I learned French at school too, and I can't remember more than about one phrase of it. So it was an amazing thing. So then we took her to a place in Fleur, in France, and a little village called Fleur, and we asked her to take us the way she remembered, the way the old coach used to go, back to the house where she used to live in 1700 and whatever it was. And she had described this house to us exactly. She described the 2 floors, the shape of it, the front of it, and the fact it had a tower at the back of the house. And it started off, it was all good fun. You know, we got in the car at Fleur. There was 3 cars, 1 red, 1 white, 1 blue, and off we went. And we were all running around these country lanes. According to where Cynthia remembered the coach went, none of us had any idea where we were. We just totally lost. And anyway, she just guided us, and she'd never been there either, but this was on a 200-year-old memory. And we went, I think, about, I can't remember how many kilometres now. It was a fair way. It was probably about an hour and a half drive. And anyway, there's only one point where we got a bit lost, and that was when we came to a new subdivision of houses. And we had to stop and ask some guy there, where did this road pick up on the other side of the subdivision, which he told us, and then we picked it up again on the other side, and then we continued on. And when as we were getting close, she said, "Oh, I think it's just around here. I think the wall's just around here." And then, of course, we went around the corner, and there it was. And then she showed us the road where to go up into this place. And as we went up this road, you could see the tension building in her as we drove up. It was like, you know, it was all good fun and light-hearted when we were driving around the country road. But the moment there was this real wall, as she remembered it, and the gate and the opening to this estate, as she remembered it, you could see that the change come over. And it was a bit like she'd seen a ghost. And then, you know, we drove up the drive, which was quite a long drive, about a kilometre. And as we drove up the drive closer and closer to this house, you could see her facial expression changing all the time, you know, and in the end she was sitting there like this, you know, really almost petrified as we came to the top of the rise, because it was exactly as she remembered. And then when we came out into the road, you could see to the top of the rise where you could see the house in front of her, it was exactly as she had described on hypnosis in Sydney. And that wasn't the main thing. It was when we drove to the front and there was this tower, the tower she talked about. That was the really main thing that, I mean, it all was exactly the same, but the one thing that really stood out was this tower. And it was standing there at the back of the house, and of course the moment she saw that tower, well, she just exploded with emotion and started sobbing. And it was like this, the realisation just suddenly hit home. It was all, up to then it was good fun, it was all, you know, maybe a little bit of a joke, a good holiday maybe, I'm going to find this place. But all of a sudden, bang, you know, this was real, all of a sudden. And from there she took us about, she remembered Mont-Saint-Michel, which is a big place in France, just off the coast, an old monastery I think it is. And she told us about that, we went there, we had a look at that. And then she took us to where she remembered the country house was. And again, the way the old coaches used to go from Mont-Saint-Michel. And she never missed a beat. She'd be there saying, "Oh, we go right, it turns, veers right just up here, and go left up here, and you know, there's a little stream around the corner," and it was just exactly as she described. This is before we actually got there. And then we got to the house, and it was again exactly as she described. And then there was the little chapel attached to this country house. Well, this country house was exactly as she described. It was a big U-shaped house. It had a coach thing goes through the middle. So it wasn't like just a box house that you might say was the same as anybody's house. It was a very unusual house. And then it was supposed to have this chapel attached. So we could see the chapel. And we said to her, "Oh, okay, let's go and have a look at the chapel now, over there." And she said, no, we go this way, it's a shortcut. So again, here's this person who's never been there in 200 years telling us a shortcut, how to get to this chapel, and the shortcut was right. So then we opened, now under hypnosis in Sydney, she told us that inside this chapel were certain features. One, the floor was covered in blue-grey tiles, a bit like slate. And the font wasn't centrally placed as normal, it was on the left. And she described this stone font. She described a very, very large crucifix, a very large gold crucifix, much larger than normal. And the other adornments, which some were still there, some were gone. But the most noticeable thing when we went into that church, or that chapel, was these blue-grey tiles right all across the floor. Exactly she described. The font was on the left, and while I didn't see it, the, what do you call him, chaplain, preacher, priest, whatever, whoever he was, yeah, he said that they did have a very large, unusual sized gold cross crucifix in that church. So all of the main features that she'd actually described in Sydney under hypnosis before we even went to the country were all there. Exactly as she described.
And Peter, it's important to know that that was before Google's time and no internet at the time. So
That's
there
right.
was no access to any information at the time.
No, that's right. There was no... Well, I don't think this church you would even find on... Well, I suppose you would now with their Google Earth. But then again, you wouldn't see inside it. But, yes, this is long before the internet. There was no internet. There was no... I mean, the only way you could find out about France, of things of that nature, was to go there. And the same with the records. You had to go there to find it. So yeah, while the case had some anomalies and some things, there were really strong elements that showed the reality of her recall in that case. And that was just one of the main cases that I worked on, but it was really interesting with her how she had this number of lives, and each time she went back to the life, her whole accent changed. The way she spoke changed, mannerisms changed, and then when we took her there to actually find the place, she was able to find a way across a large area of France, of Normandy, based upon a memory that she had sometime before, and all the things, the main landmarks that we were supposed to find, we found. So to me that was a really great, one of the best cases that I've actually worked on. Though it's not the only really good case, but it's one of the good ones.